The Appalachian Mountains are vast, ancient, and endlessly mysterious. Stretching for more than 1,000 miles, they carry stories older than the towns nestled in their valleys. For generations, hikers, wanderers, and explorers have walked their ridgelines searching for peace, adventure, or meaning. Most come home with memories. A few never return at all. In the summer of 2011, 17-year-old Elias Carter, a bright, curious teen from Asheville, North Carolina, set out on a brief solo hike in a quiet section of the Appalachians, a place he had visited dozens of times. According to his family, Elias wasn't reckless, inexperienced, or prone to disappearances. He was responsible, smart, and deeply familiar with the trails near his home. But on July 18th, Elias vanished. At first, searchers assumed he'd slipped down an embankment, maybe injured but alive. Then the days became weeks. The weeks turned into months. And soon the case went cold, leaving behind only questions, heartbreak, and a winding trail with no end. Nearly a year later, a wildlife researcher studying raven migration patterns stumbled upon something unexpected high in the canopy of a remote ridge. In a massive raven's nest, nearly 4 feet across, he spotted something that didn't belong there. Something human-made. Something that would reopen the investigation and reveal the first true sign of what happened to Elias. This is the story of a teen explorer who walked into the Appalachians and never came home, and how a raven's nest, perched above a world no human had touched in decades, finally whispered the first clue. Elias Carter was the kind of teenager adults described as old-spirited. He read nature books for fun, collected field guides the way most kids collected video games, and spent weekends identifying insects, tracking deer prints, and cataloging bird calls. His father, a science teacher, joked that Elias could have led Appalachian tours by the age of 12. By 17, Elias had logged nearly 200 miles of trails. Most were short day trips, but he had completed several overnight hikes with friends and occasionally with his uncle, a former park volunteer. He knew the basics of survival. He understood weather patterns. He could read a compass. Nothing about him suggested the kind of wanderer who would get lost. His chosen route that July morning was modest, a 6-mile loop near Cattail Ridge, quiet and safe, used frequently by locals. The weather was warm. The air was still. Nothing about the day hinted at danger. Elias left his house at 9:12 a.m., as shown by the home's outdoor camera. He wore a small day pack, lightweight hiking boots, and a baseball cap. He carried a basic emergency kit, 2 granola bars, and a stainless steel water bottle. Nothing unusual. His mother expected him back by early afternoon. When he didn't return by evening, the family first assumed he'd extended his hike. When the sun dropped behind the ridge and still there was no sign of him, concern turned into panic. They called the county sheriff around 10 p.m. By midnight, volunteers were sweeping the trailhead with flashlights and radios. 9 teams combed the entrance of the loop. Drones attempted to capture heat signatures through the trees. Nothing. Elias had vanished without leaving footprints, debris, or a trail. For searchers, this was unusual. Even experienced hikers leave behind some trace: broken branches, water bottle caps, scuffed dirt, torn fabric, something. But the first 24 hours passed with no evidence at all. On day 2, search teams expanded beyond the loop. They scanned ravines, riverbanks, and rocky outcrops. The terrain was steep in places but not hostile. Rangers familiar with the area said it was nearly impossible to disappear completely without some sign. On day 3, a storm rolled in, dropping heavy rain on the ridge. It washed away scent trails, footprints, and any chance of tracking where Elias had walked after the trailhead. 4 weeks, the search continued. Cadaver dogs were brought in. A team of 80 volunteers combed the region shoulder to shoulder. Helicopters scanned the forest canopy. Park rangers climbed into areas hikers rarely enter. Still nothing. It wasn't until month 4 that the case shifted from missing to presumed lost. With no signs of foul play, the sheriff believed Elias had slipped somewhere unreachable. But his family refused to accept that. There was no evidence. No shoe. No pack. No torn fabric. No dropped item. No trace. It was as if the forest had simply swallowed him. What no one knew, not his family, not the search teams, not the sheriff, was that the first sign of Elias would not be found on the ground at all. It would be found nearly 50 feet above the forest floor, resting in a nest built by one of the smartest birds in North America. A raven. The Appalachian Mountains are known for their dense tree canopy, rugged cliffs, hidden hollows, and miles of unmarked territory. Even in well-mapped regions, the wilderness behaves like a living maze, shifting with each storm, blocking paths with fallen logs, and masking sound with thick undergrowth. As the search stretched on, theories began circulating. Some believed Elias had suffered a sudden medical emergency and collapsed somewhere off-trail. Others suggested he'd slipped down an unforgiving ravine. A few speculated he might have encountered wildlife, though local biologists argued that fatal animal encounters were exceedingly rare. There was no evidence of any of these theories. In October, the Carter family organized a private search party. Friends, neighbors, retired rangers, anyone who would volunteer. They covered ground officials had moved past, revisiting zones already deemed clear. They weren't searching for remains. They were searching for anything: a backpack strap, a plastic wrapper, a snapped branch. Again, nothing. Winter crept onto the ridge. Snow sealed the landscape, erasing forgotten traces. Spring arrived. Summer followed. But the ridge remained silent. If not for a wildlife researcher named Dr. Adrian Mills, the mystery might have stayed buried indefinitely. Dr. Mills was studying raven nesting patterns, particularly how the birds scavenge shiny or unusual objects. Ravens are known to collect anything that catches their eye: keys, bottle caps, fragments of cloth, lost tools, and, in one documented case, a camera lens. Their nests can weigh over 100 pounds and sit high on cliffs or thick branches. On a warm June day, 11 months after Elias vanished, Dr. Mills followed a cluster of ravens circling near a remote ridge, far off established trails. He suspected a nesting site. Ravens rarely allow humans close, which meant this nest was likely untouched. The climb was difficult. The trunks were thick, the slopes steep, and the undergrowth tangled. But after nearly an hour, he spotted it, an enormous nest wedged between two thick branches of an old spruce. Ravens screeched overhead as he approached. Dr. Mills raised his binoculars. At first all he saw were twigs, moss, and forest debris typical of large raven nests. But then something caught his eye, something metallic, reflecting a sliver of sunlight. It didn't belong there. He climbed higher for a better angle. The object was wedged toward the back of the nest, partially hidden under woven branches. A stainless steel water bottle. And not just any bottle. It was engraved. 3 letters, E.C. Dr. Mills froze. He recognized the initials immediately. Nearly everyone in the region knew of the missing teen. He took photographs, noted the GPS coordinates, and backed away to avoid disturbing the nest. He left the ridge knowing the investigation was about to reopen. Within 24 hours, sheriff deputies, park officials, and members of the Carter family were at the site. After consulting wildlife guidelines, rangers safely removed the nest's foreign objects without harming the birds. What they found inside would open a new chapter in the case, one that would challenge every assumption made over the past year. Inside the nest, rangers recovered the engraved stainless steel bottle, a torn strap from a day pack, a scrap of blue fabric consistent with hiking apparel, a small metal compass, a fragment of notebook paper. Each piece was carefully preserved and examined. The bottle had Elias's initials. The torn strap was a match for the model of pack he carried. The compass style matched his father's gift. And the paper fragment, water-stained and partially shredded, contained writing. Only 5 words were legible. He followed me. Not human. Investigators could not immediately determine whether Elias had written it. The handwriting was shaky, blurred by moisture, and incomplete. Still, it was enough to raise questions. Why would these items be in a raven's nest? Ravens do scavenge objects, but they rarely collect multiple items from a single source unless the area is easily accessed or disturbed. This meant one of 3 things. 1. Elias had been near that ridge. 2. The ravens had collected his belongings from a concentrated location. 3. Something had disturbed Elias's gear long after he disappeared. Search teams expanded the area around the nest by a half-mile radius. The terrain was steep and largely uncharted, filled with thick brush, hidden drop-offs, and narrow ledges. GPS signals were unreliable. Even experienced rangers struggled to navigate it. On day 2 of the renewed search, they found what looked like a narrow depression in the earth, almost like a shallow slide where something or someone had fallen, dragging loose leaves and dirt with it. The depression led to an area of broken branches and disturbed soil. But no human remains. The sheriff's department consulted wildlife experts. Could ravens have dragged these items from a body? Unlikely. Could a predator have scattered belongings and left the items accessible to scavengers? Possible, but there were no claw marks or animal traces. Every clue only raised new questions. The most unsettling piece remained the paper fragment. He followed me. Not human. Investigators debated whether the sentence was metaphorical, perhaps fear-driven, written under panic or hallucination. Elias could have been dehydrated, lost, or injured. Stress can distort perception. But his mother disagreed. She insisted Elias was level-headed. He did not panic easily. He did not imagine things. If he wrote those words, she believed he meant them exactly as written. The case took on national attention again. Reporters descended on Asheville. Interview requests flooded the family, who declined them all. Over the next weeks, forensic analysts continued examining the recovered items. Soil samples were tested. The metal bottle revealed faint dents, as though struck against rock. The torn strap showed uneven tearing, not cut by a knife, not chewed by animals. Something had pulled it. The notebook paper yielded the most unexpected detail, trace amounts of pine resin and an unidentified dark substance. Analysts could not determine whether it was natural or synthetic. Meanwhile, rangers mapping the depression in the soil found something else, a cluster of raven feathers scattered in a tight circle. Feathers often fall naturally during nesting season, but this arrangement was strange, almost like the birds had been disturbed. Experts studying the feather scatter noted that ravens rarely allow predators near their nests. If something forced them away, it was strong or threatening. Still, the investigation stalled, until a volunteer found something wedged between 2 rocks about 50 yards from the nest. A shoelace. It matched the brand Elias wore. And it had been tied in a knot his father had taught him years earlier, a unique loop he always used on hikes. This meant one thing. Elias had reached that ridge. But how he reached it, why he left the trail, what he encountered, and what chased him, remained a mystery. And the forest still wasn't finished revealing its pieces. With the new evidence in hand, investigators expanded the search zone again, focusing on an uncharted ravine just beyond the shoelace location. The ravine was steep, carved by centuries of erosion, and almost entirely hidden behind the slope. Even satellite images failed to show its depth. The deeper the team went, the stranger the findings became. First, they found scratch marks, long, straight, and parallel, along a sandstone boulder. Wildlife experts noted that the marks did not match any regional animals. They were too uniform for bears, too wide for bobcats, not consistent with human tools. Second, They found a cluster of rocks arranged in a way that suggested deliberate placement. It resembled a marker, something a hiker might construct to signal distress or mark a direction. Third, they found another fragment of notebook paper, too damaged to decipher. Only one faint stroke of ink remained, a vertical line, possibly part of a letter. It wasn't enough. The breakthrough came when searchers reached a narrow ledge halfway down the ravine. There, partially buried under silt and pine needles, was a piece of nylon fabric. It had faded from weather exposure but retained enough color to identify it as part of Elias's backpack. And near it, a deeper, irregular indentation marked the earth, almost like a footprint, but elongated and distorted, as though someone had slipped or shifted weight. Some believed it was Elias's. Others were unsure. The ravine grew darker the deeper they went. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. Bird calls faded. The air felt unnaturally still. One volunteer later described the atmosphere as silent in the wrong way, as though something was listening. Halfway down the ravine, searchers found a narrow alcove, a shallow cave eroded into the rock. Its entrance was masked by moss and ferns. Inside, the air was cooler. Moisture dripped from the ceiling. And on the far wall, carved faintly into the stone, were two letters. E.C. Elias had been there. The marks were shallow, hurried, and incomplete. They suggested fear, urgency, or both. But there was something else. Using a flashlight, rangers inspected the cave floor and discovered small fragments of bone, not human, likely belonging to small animals. They also found a smooth stone stained by a dark substance. Tests later confirmed it was old blood, though the source could not be identified. The cave told a story without speaking. Elias had taken shelter here. He had attempted to mark his presence. Something had frightened him badly enough to scratch the cliff wall and flee. But flee from what? Just beyond the cave, near a narrow descent, searchers discovered a trail of disturbed vegetation, a path where something had moved recently, twisting branches and crushing ferns. The pattern suggested a bipedal gait but irregular, as if limping or unbalanced. For weeks, investigators followed every lead. But the ravine ended at a sheer drop, an unforgiving cliff overlooking dense forest. Below it, the land was too chaotic to trace. Rocks, roots, fallen trees. They feared Elias might have fallen. Yet no remains were ever found. With the season shifting again and the land growing more dangerous, officials made the difficult decision to suspend the search. For the Carter family, it was another heartbreak. But the story was not finished. Because 3 weeks later, far from the ravine, a hiker made a discovery that would turn the investigation in a direction no one expected. A hiker named Mara Winters, unfamiliar with the ongoing investigation, was exploring an isolated section of the Appalachians roughly 5 miles from the ravine. The area was rugged, rarely visited, and dotted with old logging routes nearly swallowed by vegetation. While stepping over a fallen tree, Mara noticed something lying in the brush, a thin, weather-worn notebook cover. She almost kept walking, assuming it was trash. But when she turned it over, she saw faint black lettering. Carter. She reported it immediately. This notebook, once restored and dried by analysts, revealed several intact pages. They were Elias's. Most entries were ordinary field notes, observations about birds, weather, and plants. But the final pages documented something troubling. I saw a man on the trail. No pack. No shoes. He stood too still. Like he was waiting. I called out. He didn't answer. He turned and walked into the trees. I followed because I thought he needed help. He moved strangely. Never looked back. Something is wrong with him. He's not human. I know how that sounds. But his eyes. I'm going to try to circle back to the main loop. That was the final entry. The notebook created a new timeline, Elias encountered someone, or something, on the trail. He followed it off the path. And somewhere along the way, he became trapped in the ravine. Searchers returned to the region between the notebook location and the ravine. They found snapped branches consistent with someone moving quickly. They found disturbed moss. They found faint impressions in the soil. But no sign of Elias. No remains. No further belongings. Just the trail of a terrified teenager running from something the forest still refuses to explain. In 2013, the case was officially closed. The Carter family held a memorial. But unofficial searches continued for years. To this day, no one knows what Elias saw in the trees. No one knows what followed him. No one knows why a raven collected his belongings. But in the Appalachian wilderness, stories linger. Some say the forest protected him. Others say something else claimed him. And a few believe he's still out there, watching, waiting, unseen. Whatever the truth is, the first sign of his fate came not from the ground, but from above, resting in the woven sticks of a raven's nest high in the Appalachian sky. The disappearance of Elias Carter remains one of the most unsettling missing person cases in Appalachian history. Not because of what was found, but because of what wasn't. No single theory explains the torn gear, the scattered items, the carved initials in the cave, or the final words inked in his notebook. What frightened him? What chased him? Why did he abandon the trail he knew so well? The ravens offered the first clue, but the mountain kept the rest. The Appalachians are ancient, older than the bones of most continents. They hold stories we cannot explain, shadows we do not fully understand, and paths that can swallow even the most prepared hikers. Elias's case is a reminder that the wilderness is vast, unpredictable, and alive in ways we may never fully comprehend. Not every mystery reveals itself. Not every trail leads home. If you've listened this far, consider subscribing for more in-depth documentary stories like this one. Your support helps us continue exploring unsolved disappearances, strange historical cases, and the unexplained corners of our world. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, some trails give answers. Others only give questions.